UFO encounters are terrifying experiences, but for everyday heroes, it becomes a mission.
The officer grabbed his rifle, got out of his Jeep, and decided to pursue it.
He's firing armor-piercing bullets into the glowing light.
Serve and protect, no matter the cost.
He and the other soldiers immediately felt a burning, tingling sensation all over their bodies.
People died because we were dealing with technologies that we didn't even begin to understand.
But if UFO reports are intentionally ignored and brave witnesses are discredited for speaking out,
he lost his job, and this just made him crazy because he knew that what he saw was real. He knew it was legitimate.
who will protect us from extraterrestrials? Ravenna, Ohio, April 17th, 1966.
It's just before dawn on a midnight shift that Deputy Sheriff Dale Spower and Deputy Wilbur Neff will never forget.
All morning, their police radio had been filled with all sorts of chatter from witnesses near Akron, Ohio, claiming to have seen a large, bright disk flying through the sky.
With just a few hours left of their day, they noticed something unusual, an abandoned car on Route 224. Just as Neff is about to reach the car, Spower senses something.
In Spower's written report, he states he feels the need to look behind him. Spower tells Neff to look over his shoulder.
They're suddenly engulfed in light, and the only thing they can hear is a hum, like a transformer being overloaded.
Both police officers are frozen underneath this light. Spower remembers moving his right foot slightly to make sure he can still move. And when they realize they aren't actually paralyzed, they run as fast as they can for the patrol car.
Can you imagine? Two veteran officers used to dealing with local domestic issues now find themselves facing a UFO. Immediately, Spower gets on the radio and reports what they just saw. Dispatch tells them not to move and to wait in the car. They're sending immediate backup.
Spower and Neff nervously wait as the light engulfs their car.
The officers are starting to panic, and they're thinking, should we shoot at it or should we get out of here? They're absolutely terrified, but they have their orders to wait for backup, if they survive that long. But then, inexplicably, the UFO just takes off. They're stunned and relieved, and once they regain their composure, they do the unthinkable. They actually chase this thing.
These two officers are actually pursuing this UFO, going about 100 miles an hour towards the Pennsylvania border along US Route 224.
As the sun rises, the UFO continues traveling east, approaching the Pennsylvania state line.
Patrolman Frank Panzanilla of Conway, Pennsylvania, is sitting in his squad car drinking coffee when he sees a large object fly over him. His first instinct is also to pursue the UFO.
Panzanilla radios to see if they have anything on their radar. They picked up an unidentified object on their screen.
The officers aren't the only ones interested in this craft.
4 fighter jets appear in the sky. The police receive confirmation on their radios that the jets are pursuing the UFO.
The police officers must be thinking, wow, this is really happening. The Air Force is going to take down a UFO right in front of us. But the UFO then shoots upward into the sky at an incredible speed until it disappears, gone before the jets can make a move.
Within hours, this case was picked up by the press, and from there, the Air Force gave it a lot of attention.
All the police officers involved are then contacted by the military's UFO investigative unit, Project Blue Book.
This is where the Air Force cover-up begins. Blue Book Chief Major Hector Quintanilla arrives on the scene.
Hector Quintanilla headed Project Blue Book from 1963 until its closure in 1970. In addition to his degree in physics, he was recruited to the position because they needed a man who was, quote, cool under pressure.
He gets to Dale Spar, and the first thing he says to him is, tell me about this mirage that you saw.
Can you imagine? You're a police officer and you've just seen the most incredible thing. And the first thing the Air Force does is accuse you of seeing a mirage.
Could the officers have witnessed a top-secret military plane forcing the Air Force to try and deflect attention from the truth?
Spar describes exactly what he saw in great detail, but Quintanilla doesn't ask any more questions, and he doesn't attempt to interview the other 3 officers who also saw the UFO.
Major Quintanilla holds a press conference to release the Air Force's official findings on the incident.
Quintanilla's explanation was simple. The officers had been chasing an echo communication satellite, and then after the sun came up, that changed to them chasing the planet Venus. Quintanilla also denied that any jet fighters had been in the area attempting to engage or intercept the UFO.
Unsatisfied with the official explanation, a number of investigators, including famed ufologist William Weitzel, are determined to find out what really happened.
William Weitzel got on the scene and found 3 other police officers and 4 other civilian witnesses who had seen a UFO between 5 and 5:30 that morning.
After Weitzel's findings, Quintanilla is forced to reopen the case. Realizing simple deflection was not effective, stronger tactics are employed.
Quintanilla and Spar sit down for another meeting, this time attended by William Weitzel and local reporters. But afterwards, Quintanilla stands by his original conclusion that the police officers were chasing Venus. He says there's never a UFO. Case closed.
Project Blue Book head Quintanilla successfully closes the case. The police officers who witnessed the UFO find themselves discredited, left trying to understand what they did wrong.
After this whole event was over, the officers involved really took it hard. Officer Houston quit the force and moved off to Seattle just to get away. Officer Neff became a recluse. And I think Dale Spar had it the worst. He lost his job and his marriage, and for years was hounded by the press, everyone trying to debunk his case and make him look like he didn't know what he was doing. And this just made him crazy because he knew that what he saw was real. He knew it was legitimate.
During this Cold War era, UFOs were treated primarily as a threat. These military people come in and intimidate the officers and then discredit them for something that obviously the government knows is going on.
When the government states that UFOs don't exist, what happens to local law enforcement, our heroes on the ground, when they confront unidentified objects and aliens? How do they fulfill their duty and protect civilians from otherworldly dangers? What further consequences might they face? January 5th, 2000, near Scott Air Force Base, Illinois.
Melvin Knoll, a local Highland, Illinois truck driver, pulls into his company office at 4 a.m. He looks up and notices this really bright light in the sky that's moving towards him. And he realizes that the light is actually coming from a huge triangle-looking craft.
A recording from the county radio dispatcher documents the driver's report to the Highland Police Department.
We received a call from the Highland PD in reference to a truck driver who just stopped in and said there was a flying object.
Officer Ed Barton responds to the call at 4:10 a.m. He asks the county dispatcher if she's joking. The dispatcher says no. The man who stopped in was totally serious.
Just a quick question. If I happen to find it, what am I supposed to do with it?
As soon as Officer Barton turns into Route 4, there's a bright light coming from a large triangle. He pulls over to the side of the road, kills the car lights, and turns off his radio to see if this thing is making any noise.
The object makes no sound, but he can see every detail on this craft because it's moving right above him at a steady speed. As soon as it passes, he radios the sighting into Central Command. He predicts that the object should be hitting the town of Shiloh, Illinois at any moment.
In Shiloh, Officer David Martin soon radios in that he sees the craft as well.
What does it look like to you?
It's kind of V-shaped.
Several minutes later, at 4:29 a.m., Officer Craig Stevens, who's in the nearby town of Millstadt, radios in that he also sees a triangular UFO passing over his patrol car. And then at 4:35 a.m., another officer in DuPont, Illinois, reports that he can also see the craft, but at this point, it's climbing altitude fast and he's losing track of the lights.
If you would, contact Scott Air Force Base and see if they have anything flying in this area, please.
The dispatcher calls Scott Air Force Base, who report that they have not detected any unidentified object on their radar. But here you have no less than 4 different officers all witnessing the same craft. Yet Scott Air Force Base claims they've got nothing. It just doesn't add up.
Does the government and military turn a blind eye when it comes to these kinds of sightings?
Any singular event that has happened with pilots reporting, the police department on the ground reporting this, and then the story dies the next day. You don't know if there's an investigation going on internally. We know that there is, but the government doesn't talk about it, any government.
If you can imagine the courage it takes, these men who have been trained, they're out there under the sky every day. We trust these men.
The son of a cop and having grown up around cops my whole life and knowing the kinds of witnesses that they are, I find it offensive when you start seeing all the ridicule that so many of them have been facing. Once a police officer has seen a UFO, they very adamantly will defend what they saw against all odds.
As these officers continue to protect the front lines of our streets and military bases, risking their safety and credibility, their heroism must be recognized. Police officers are trained to be meticulous about details, but when it comes to UFO sightings, their reports are often challenged or the incident is dismissed as a hoax. UFO investigators suggest that this treatment lines up directly with how Project Blue Book and the military dealt with civilian UFO witnesses, and that these protocols were applied to police officers as well. April 24th, 1964, Socorro, New Mexico.
Officer Lonnie Zamora is driving in his car outside of Socorro, New Mexico. He's chasing a speeder. All of a sudden, Zamora hears this roaring sound, and he sees what he thinks is a flame object in the sky.
Zamora breaks off from the chase to investigate. He thinks that a local dynamite shack may have exploded.
He's moving closer to where this event was taking place.
It's then that he notices a shining object, which at first he thought was an overturned car. Zamora gets on the radio and tells the dispatcher he's leaving his car to check out a situation in the arroyo. Suddenly, a loud roar emanates from the craft. A huge flame bursts out of the craft. The craft begins lifting up and then immediately takes off. Zamora radios a fellow officer, Sergeant Chavez, asking him if he sees a craft in the sky. Radio silence.
When Chavez finally got there, the two of them found 4 indentations in the ground where the object had sat, some burnt vegetation, and they took very detailed notes and pictures of the whole area, and they put together a complete report.
2 days after the incident, Major Quintanilla, the head of the Air Force's Project Blue Book, shows up to investigate the report. But he isn't the only one who descends on the town.
The sleepy little town of Socorro, New Mexico was overrun by major journalists. UPI, AP were there. Government agents, FBI, military intelligence were there, and private UFO investigators were also there. Everyone wanted to look for answers.
The evidence gathered by the police appears to be compelling.
Subsequent research and analysis of the ground samples and photos revealed that some of the sand in the ground appeared to have been fused together as if it had come in contact with some very high intense form of heat.
Then, on June 8, 1964, Quintanilla issues his formal Project Blue Book report.
Not surprisingly, this report turned all the evidence right on its head. It stated no substantial evidence had been found to support any kind of event, none of the witnesses were reliable, and so on. Now, in the classified version of that report, it was a little bit of a different story. I have Hector Quintanilla's words right here, and I quote, "There is no doubt that Lonnie Zamora saw an object that left an impression on him and scared Zamora to the point of panic."
Zamora became so hounded by the Air Force and ufologists that he quit law enforcement, and he took a job managing a gas station.
If I were in the shoes of these officers that saw these things and were then shut up and intimidated, I would absolutely lose faith in myself. This has to be a profound effect on their whole sense of who they are. The fact that the government would step in after these careers of service and treat them like crazy people, when we know the government knows a heck of a lot more than what they're telling us.
If I had been working back in the 50s and 60s, I don't think I would have wanted to make a UFO report. Something like that could destroy your credibility. You just turn your head and look the other way. But you know, that's stressful, and you have to carry that with you.
Based on Quintanilla's report, the case was closed. But shortly thereafter, a UFO researcher named James McDonald locates a local scientist who claims to have analyzed a soil sample from the Socorro landing site.
Mary G. Mays was a doctoral student in radiation biology at the University of New Mexico, and she was asked to analyze some of the soil samples from the Socorro case. So she didn't find any radiation in the soil, but she did find 2 organic substances that she was not able to identify.
This is an important detail. It proved that whatever landed there had organic material that is not found on Earth.
The analysis on the soil samples really opens up the possibility, maybe the likelihood, They were talking about two different kinds of investigations, or two versions of the investigation, the public one and the not-so-public one. What it looks like to me is that Quintanilla and Blue Book were sent in basically to mess up the investigation and make Zamora look like a fool.
But officers on the ground are not the only ones who meet resistance when reporting UFO incidents. While on patrol, police officers can find themselves on the front lines with UFO encounters. But not all of these extraterrestrial encounters are reported. There are many that are kept quiet by silencing and discrediting the brave men and women who put their lives on the line. Louisville, Kentucky, 1993.
At 11:50 p.m., Officers Graham and Downs are in the middle of a routine patrol flight when they receive a call about a possible break-in near Sanford Avenue and Bushell Bank Road.
The officers fly over the area when suddenly Graham notices a small light below them. Downs points the helicopter spotlight on the object to get a better look.
Downs and Graham see a glowing pear-shaped object about the size of a basketball.
Suddenly, the object shoots up right in front of the helicopter and then spins counterclockwise around them until it stops right behind the two pilots.
Graham has never seen anything like it. Now he's afraid the object's going to ram the tail rotor, so he pushes the helicopter forward at 100 miles an hour. Incredibly, the UFO chases them, and at one point, even shoots past them.
All of a sudden, the UFO appears to shoot 3 fireballs at the helicopter. Graham is able to bank his helicopter away from the blast. The pilots are panicking, but then the UFO just zips away.
The officers wake up their boss, Lieutenant David Pope, to give them their full report.
Pope can't believe what he's hearing. He knows that his officers are credible. He stated in a report that Graham was a veteran pilot and that both he and Downs were military veterans with many years of service.
So look at the facts here. These are police officers who work in the air. They work in the sky every single day. Well, of course they know the difference between a star, a planet, and some bell-shaped thing flying around their helicopter.
Lieutenant Pope submits his report to superiors, but it goes unnoticed.
Downs and Graham can't believe the report isn't being taken seriously. And then, if that isn't enough, fellow colleagues warn them to just let it go because it was starting to make the department look bad.
It makes you wonder if these police officers were hung out to dry with nowhere for them to go and no one to provide any answers.
Is the military intentionally ignoring UFO reports by police officers in order to protect law enforcement authority? Or are they trying to protect themselves by avoiding a paper trail? It seems these extreme measures may also be taken in the commercial airline industry, where they go to great lengths to protect the status quo.
When you start to look at these cases, it seems like the airline industry and the FAA are really dedicated to enforcing an unofficial code of silence when it comes to UFOs.
Our culture and the industry we operate in puts a high value on a pilot's psychological makeup. It's at the very core of what we do. It must never come into question. Clearly, a pilot does not want to be thought of as having any psychological issues. It's really something that's just never discussed within the industry.
UFO files contain numerous stories of pilots conflicted between revealing their encounters or risking their jobs.
Here's one case that illustrates the point. Captain Neil Daniels, a 35-year pilot with over 30,000 hours in the sky.
March 1977. Captain Daniels is piloting a commercial flight from San Francisco to Boston when a bright object suddenly appears in the passenger plane's flight path.
Captain Daniels and his co-pilot saw what they both described as a large, perfectly round, glowing ball. And it was hovering less than a mile in front of their plane. And whatever this thing in front of them was, it was acting aggressively.
The plane makes a sudden left turn, one that is not under the pilot's control.
This might have been electromagnetic interference, who knows? But something about this UFO knocked the plane off course. The tower was radioing in, "What do you think you're doing?" It was chaos. And then it was over. Captain Daniels regained control.
But the UFO continues to rapidly approach the plane.
The blinding light flew alongside their DC-10 for several minutes, then shot away at a mind-numbing speed that they didn't even think was possible.
The object disappears, and Captain Daniels safely lands, but he is concerned about coming forward with the story.
Like any pilot, he was worried about what people will think of him. Will they think he's crazy? But Captain Daniels knew what he and his flight crew saw, and eventually he couldn't keep it to himself any longer.
A few months later, Daniels is on a duck hunting trip with his boss. He tells him about this incident, and his boss's reply is, "I'm sorry to hear that. Bad things can happen to pilots that report those type of incidents."
Commercial airline pilots often speak of the stigma attached to reporting sightings.
We talked about this. It was pretty much a guaranteed medical disqualification. Airlines didn't want pilots saying they'd seen flying saucers. It was pretty much a given. If you shut your mouth off about this stuff, you were going to lose your job.
Because there's so much stigma and ridicule towards people who do talk about UFOs, it takes a tremendous amount of courage for any pilot or any aviation person to speak out about a UFO event.
UFO archives contain thousands of sightings by police officers and commercial airline pilots. But the files also contain reports from military aviators around the world who say they have aggressively engaged with UFOs in the air. The unfriendly skies include one Air Force dogfight over the Iranian city of Tehran. (1976), Iran. Multiple witnesses observe an anomaly in the skies over the city of Tehran.
Citizens on the ground started calling in reports of a diamond-shaped bright object in the sky. It looked kind of like a star, only brighter.
There are reports that this UFO was visible from over 70 miles away.
The object is witnessed by an Iranian Air Force general. Fighter jets are scrambled to investigate.
Planes went up, and each one had two pilots in it. One of them was Parviz Jafari. He described this main thing, though, as this brilliant, brilliant, flashing, like a strobe light, he described it as. Red, orange, yellow, blue, green, all these colors just flashing like a gigantic strobe light, and it just sat there. And so bright, he said, that you couldn't see any body underneath it, any physical shape. You could just see these brilliant, brilliant, brilliant light.
As the pilots approach the UFO, the situation quickly turns dangerous.
As they got too close to the object, they would lose their equipment, and then they would fly back.
And it wasn't until they veered away that the plane and their systems came back online.
The pilots approached again, and this time when they got close to the UFO, it suddenly launched projectiles toward their jets.
This diamond-shaped object started sending out what he describes as projectiles. They were round objects that came out from the main one and started zooming towards his aircraft as if they were going to hit him. And so Parviz Jafari and his co-pilot prepared their missiles to fire and defend themselves. And when they were just about to press the button to fire the missile systems would go out. It was almost as if somehow the object knew. And when they were just putting on their button, out it went, and that happened 3 times.
And so here they were, facing an apparently hostile UFO, and they had no way to defend themselves. Their equipment kept failing. They couldn't rely on their own weapons. At this point, they needed to get away from that thing. Captain Jafari tried to eject, but even that failed.
The pilots execute evasive maneuvers and return to base.
Parviz Jafari was then debriefed in a big meeting at the Air Force headquarters.
At the time, Iran is a U.S. ally and invites an American Air Force representative to assist in the investigation.
The American filed a very detailed document about the case, just describing everything that happened, and that it had very high intelligence value, and that it was really an example of why UFO cases should be studied and taken seriously.
It came out that as the jets were landing, the objects buzzed the control tower, and the control tower equipment went offline. So there was pretty strong evidence that whatever they were dealing with, it had the means to shut things down at will. Their jets, their radar, and their communications.
It's another event that has never been explained. We don't know what that brilliant object was.
The Tehran incident suggests the possibility that UFOs can pose a real danger to the brave servicemen who fight in the air. And if highly advanced military jets can be threatened, how safe are the soldiers fighting on the ground? There is a secret history of military engagements with UFOs during times of war, from air-to-air combat to battles in the trenches. But when the brave men in combat are pitted against otherworldly technology, the fight is far from fair. Spring, 1951, Korea. An area known as the Iron Triangle is the site of repeated battles between American soldiers and the Chinese People's Army.
In the spring of 1951, the 2nd Battalion Easy Company of the Army's 25th Division was deployed to advance into North Korea to conquer and destroy Chinese forces.
Francis Wall was a private first class with Easy Company, and his unit was stationed on a mountain slope in a very remote area near Cheonan, Korea. Below them was a village, and on this night, their mission was to bombard the village with artillery.
As Easy Company begins firing on the village below, they notice something strange overhead coming straight towards them.
Wall and his unit suddenly see a glowing saucer-shaped light wafting down across the mountain to the right.
The object is so quick that it maneuvers directly into the path of their artillery fire, yet it remains untouched.
As Private Wall reports, the glowing saucer comes right towards the unit until it is literally on top of them. It was hard for them to determine the size because what they remembered mostly was that brilliant light.
Private Wall gets the order from his commander to start firing at the UFO. And the UFO responds.
The UFO begins moving erratically when they hear something that they've never heard before.
Like the revving of some kind of high-tech engine.
A laser beam of light strikes each man in pulses.
Wall reported that he and the other soldiers immediately felt a burning, tingling sensation all over their bodies.
When Wall saw the light on his body, it was like an X-ray machine. He could see the bones in his hands and arms. Here you have some of the bravest men in the Army with some of the most advanced weapons at the time, and they're completely helpless against this unknown force.
The company commander orders everyone to run to the bunkers for protection. They do, but the UFO follows them and hovers over them, essentially pinning them down between the enemy below and the UFO above.
Once in the bunker, the men of Easy Company begin to suffer from the effects of the UFO's attack.
Not only were the men terrified, but they soon became extremely ill.
These men were physically sick. They were weak and vomiting and completely overcome. As they lay there, the craft stayed above their bunker, almost like it was tormenting them. Suddenly, it shot up in the air at a 45-degree angle and disappeared.
The men were still too sick to move. It was like they were paralyzed.
They couldn't eat or drink anything without getting sick, and they were stuck there for days until reinforcements could be sent.
3 days later, the Army rescue team finally arrived to evacuate the entire company, who were all still too weak to even walk. When they finally did get medical attention, their doctors couldn't explain the extreme high white blood cell count.
Was this a case of the enemy using lethal gas as a weapon? Or was it from the contact with the UFO?
You have to wonder if they suffered from some kind of radiation sickness or exposure to some other kind of dangerous element. In fact, years later in 1987, Wall told a journalist that he continues to suffer from headaches, fatigue, and disorientation, and to this day, his body is still not functioning normally.
The fact that Private Wall was physically affected is one thing. He was psychologically affected because you absolutely do not understand what it is you have just gone through. These things are absolutely confusing. They don't fit in normal reality. If you just think of the imagery of it all, it looks like a horror movie.
Why did a UFO attack and disrupt Easy Company's mission that day?
I find this particular report of the Iron Triangle to be very interesting. It's an early combat situation with a UFO. And I think it's interesting to keep in mind that this is at a time during the Korean War when General Douglas MacArthur was talking very seriously about wanting to use nuclear weapons in an attempt to win the war. You could really look at this as a situation in which this other agency, these other beings, whoever they were, are saying to the Americans, hey, look, we've got something that's a lot more significant, a lot more powerful than what you have. So maybe you want to think twice.
Was the UFO show of force an attempt to dissuade the U.S. from deploying deadly measures? As the Korean War continues, there are more dangerous encounters, and not just with troops on the ground. But to engage in an air fight with UFOs and their far superior alien technology, it could put hundreds of American pilots at risk. UFO investigative files reveal a pattern of cases involving heroic soldiers, police, and pilots who have gone head-to-head with some of the most dangerous UFOs on record. And during times of war, it's been reported that the military have insisted on engaging with these entities, no matter the cost. September 1950, port of Incheon, North Korea.
It's early morning, shortly after the start of the Korean War. A North Korean truck convoy is spotted moving through a valley about 100 miles south of the Chinese border. 3 American attack jets are launched from an aircraft carrier to bomb the convoy.
The sun is just coming up when the Navy jets finally make their target. Each aircraft carries a pilot, a radar operator gunner, and about 4,000 pounds of bombs.
And just as the jets see their target and are about to drop their payload, they find themselves staring at a pair of huge UFOs approaching from the northwest.
The pilots couldn't believe their eyes. These UFOs were 700 feet in diameter and coming towards them at incredible speed, they estimated at 1,200 miles an hour.
One of the gunners goes to fire at a UFO when he realizes their weapons are jammed. They try to radio for help, but the radio is dead too. All three jets are experiencing the same problems with their equipment.
Two jets peel off to head back to the carrier, but the UFOs continue to follow the lone jet that remains on its mission. These UFOs circle the jet as if they're inspecting it before they zip out of sight at high speeds.
The remaining pilot realizes his fuel is low, so instead of engaging his target, he decides he needs to return to the carrier. Back on the carrier, all three Navy pilots report that they experienced the same systems failures in each of their jets.
Those guys were completely helpless up there, and what probably kept them alive was the fact that they couldn't shoot their weapons.
I've never heard of an incident where they have attacked us first. It was always in response to something that we might do.
Is it possible the UFO simply wanted to make itself known, and for the pilot's protection, prevented them from firing their weapons?
When they attempted to fire, the weapon system was shut down. In some way, they disrupted the system. The information that we're getting, basically the reason they're here is to save our planet.
Incredibly, these mid-air UFO encounters with Naval and Air Force pilots persisted throughout the Korean War.
In March of 1952, the Washington Post published an article saying that the Pentagon knew of more than 24 flying saucer incidents over North Korea. They had documentation and radar reports from personnel involved. These were such dramatic events that the officials couldn't even cover them up.
Around this time, in the early 1950s, retired Marine Corps Major Donald Kehoe, who was an active UFO investigator, he stated that at this time, U.S. Air Force had had over 300 encounters with mysterious lights and unidentified objects. But I do know that orders were given to try to bring them down. Well, we learned our lesson that when we tried to shoot them down, our crews didn't come back.
Our government is being overwhelmed with reports of unbeatable alien craft above the battlefields. And yet here they are, still commanding our armed forces to just blindly engage these UFOs.
The U.S. military's decision to battle these UFOs may have cost them greatly.
I do know that we lost a great number of aircraft during the periods from 1952 to 58, both Navy and Air Force. Benjamin Chidlaw, who was the head of Air Defense Command, said publicly that we take UFOs seriously, that they are, in fact, very dangerous.
According to UFO case files, the military employed a shoot-them-down policy during the Korean War. But after a deadly incident, the government moved away from this stance. Could this new directive be keeping troops safe from extraterrestrial encounters? According to UFO investigators, the military has a long history of undermining and discrediting law enforcement testimony regarding UFO encounters. But despite this intention, information is still often leaked. (1980) Kirtland Air Force Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
10 minutes before midnight on August 8th, 1980, 3 security policemen are on duty at the Manzana weapons storage area, just east of Kirtland Air Force Base.
The Manzana weapons storage area consisted of a series of tunnels that had been excavated into 3 mountains, and in these tunnels is where nuclear weapons were stored. On this night, 3 guards at the base saw a very bright light about 3 miles northeast of their position.
The men noticed this light traveling very fast before it suddenly stops over Coyote Canyon.
Coyote Canyon was a restricted area, and so all 3 officers became very nervous when they saw this lighted object begin to descend into the canyon. About 3 miles east of that position, there was another military police officer. He was on patrol, and he was told to check out the weapons barracks area. This officer drove down an access road to Coyote Canyon, and when he got there, he saw a very bright light in the air, and above it was a disc-shaped object.
He starts to panic. He tries to radio for help, but his radio doesn't work.
The officer grabbed his rifle, got out of his Jeep, and decided to pursue it. He heard the sound of metal, and before he knew it, the ship just took off.
The lone patrolman who fired at the object reports the incident to Sandia Base Security Headquarters.
The officer on duty reported the incident on August 9th, but Sandia Base didn't report it until August 11th, and they were supposed to report it to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Protocol dictated that anything like that had to be reported immediately, but it wasn't.
But here's where things get more interesting. For some reason, the AFOSI office at Kirtland informed Sandia that the Air Force no longer investigates such sightings unless they specifically occur on a base.
But this doesn't make any sense because the incident did happen around a U.S. Air Force facility, and furthermore, near nuclear weapons. And yet AFOSI is not interested?
The AFOSI's main directive is to provide investigative services to protect the national security of the U.S. So to claim that a UFO that lands near a nuclear weapons storage unit is out of their jurisdiction is ludicrous.
On the night of August 11th, the UFO returns to the exact same location.
At that point, the Air Force just couldn't deny it.
On August 22nd, Major Edwards from Kirtland Air Force Base interviews every officer who was involved in these multiple sightings. Major Edwards informs an intelligence officer named Richard Doty of the persistent accounts of UFO sightings near their nuclear weapons storage site.
Richard Doty is a controversial character in the whole history of UFOs. Doty was expert at leading people on a wild goose chase.
It appears that once Officer Doty became involved, the case was doomed and eventually buried.
This is an important case because you have multiple witnesses of a multiple sighting that took place over several days, all claiming to see the same object near Coyote Canyon. So it appears there was a cover-up.
Once again, we see forces from above come in and take these credible men, these servants to our country, and make them feel like they've done something wrong when they were just doing their duty.
If it was a cover-up, who were they hiding the information from? The public was not involved in this. It was strictly military. Was the military hiding information from the military?
Perhaps there is a group outside of the military that specializes in such secrecy. A mysterious organization known only as the Men in Black. July 1987, an undisclosed military base in Utah.
A soldier's patrolling this base adjacent to the desert, and suddenly he sees something big come rising over a mountain range.
It's this brilliant glowing object in the sky. A blue light that is burning so brightly, he can't actually make out what's under the light.
And soon he's able to tell that this is some kind of almond-shaped aircraft about 100 feet across.
According to the witness, the mysterious craft hovers over the mountains. At certain points, its lights dim and it seems to vanish, only to reappear moments later in a nearby location.
He knows this isn't a military aircraft because as part of his job, he would have been notified ahead of time about any kind of activity on the base. Not to mention that this UFO appears to be somehow teleporting to different locations in the area.
Little does the soldier know that this will not be his only disturbing encounter of the evening.
The soldier radios in to report this sighting, and this is when he gets his first hint that something's wrong. As soon as he mentions the UFO, his superior stops replying to him, and someone else comes on the line. It's a voice he's never heard before.
The soldier is ordered to abort his patrol and immediately report to the provost marshal's office.
As soon as the soldier walks in, he's handcuffed, treated like a criminal.
There's a general waiting for him, but not one that he knows from the base. And the general isn't alone. He's accompanied by two mysterious men wearing identical black suits.
The soldier is taken to an isolated room where men in black suits proceed to interrogate him about the UFO sighting.
These guys don't identify themselves as being from the military, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, or anything. They just start in with the questions.
They grill him for hours about every detail of this UFO sighting. Keep in mind, the actual UFO sighting lasted a few minutes, but they keep asking him the same questions over and over again in excruciating detail.
When they're finally finished, the soldier is ordered to never mention the sighting or his meeting with the two men in black.
One of the men in black takes him aside and whispers a final warning.
He points out the desert surrounding the military base. He tells the soldier if he doesn't heed their warning and keep his mouth shut about the UFO, well, this is a big desert. It would take a long time for someone to find your body out there.
It's only when he retires, after 2 decades of constantly looking over his shoulder for these mysterious men, that he finally reports the encounter.
When you take all of these case files into account, it might be possible that there isn't just one single Men in Black entity. When we talk about Men in Black, we could be talking about a lot of different things.
Reports of the Men in Black suddenly appearing in the aftermath of a UFO event have occurred since the 1950s. They are said to intimidate UFO witnesses into silence about their encounters. For the thousands of UFO cases involving acts of bravery in the face of otherworldly danger, there are countless stories of the Men in Black appearing almost out of nowhere to cover it all up. But who exactly are these mystery men, and how far does their shadowy reach extend? August 1991, the Pacific Ocean.
The USS Nimitz is returning home to Hawaii after a long deployment in the first Gulf War.
My name is Kevin Vai. I was a PH-2 stationed on the USS Nimitz in 1991 when this happened to me.
Kevin is an expert at identifying all forms of U.S. and enemy jets because he's the one responsible for photographing and documenting them for the Navy.
I finished my evening shift, and as usual, I had gone up to the deck to look at the ocean, hopefully watch the sunset. And while I was sitting there, they locked the ship down.
This protocol could mean that there is an imminent danger.
Vi has only 30 seconds to clear the deck. He doesn't make it.
Everything is locked down before he has a chance to go under. Kevin decides to wait it out.
I started feeling like something was buzzing inside of me, and I started looking around. Whatever was buzzing was everywhere. I could feel it in my body. I could hear it. I could feel it on my hands against the rail that I was holding on to.
The next thing he sees paralyzes him in fear.
As Vi looks over the ship's starboard side, he's astounded to see something rising out of the ocean.
In front of me was a very large object. I mean, this thing was huge. It was larger than the Nimitz. I could see the water underneath it glowed. I'm not sure if it was lights coming down from the ship or the ocean itself. And it had to be that this thing came from out of the water. I knew that I saw something from another world.
The craft continues to rise until it levels off above the height of the Nimitz. And it sits there about 200 yards from the ship for about 15 minutes, not making any sound, although he says the buzzing sensation remained the whole time.
The craft now appeared to have no apparent color, that it almost looked like glass.
It started to move slightly, and then all of a sudden it went up, and I mean up fast. It was literally from where it was at me in front of the ocean to a pinpoint in the sky in a half a second.
Following the incident, Kevin Vi is isolated for questioning.
When these guys started questioning, my first impression was, well, I'm not going to tell them what I saw, because everybody will think I'm a lunatic. I just wanted to go about my normal life and pretend like nothing had changed, although everything had changed.
Did Kevin Vi witness a UFO? And if so, what would have happened if there were multiple witnesses? For one case, decades earlier, an entire crew experiences the inescapable power of the Men in Black.
How big of a potential threat are the Men in Black? According to one case, they're big enough to push around the U.S. military.
March 17th, 1972. A U.S. Navy vessel is docked in Mayport, Florida. Its entire crew is locked down, unable to leave, as a small group of Men in Black interrogate every sailor on board.
This Navy ship has been commandeered by the Men in Black because of something that happened at sea the night before.
March 16th, 1972, the Atlantic Ocean. The ship is en route to its home port when a lookout radios his commanding officer about strange activity in the sky.
The commanding officer gets a message that there's something unusual in the sky over the ship. But at the same time, he's checking the radar, and it isn't showing anything.
The ship's master-at-arms is dispatched to confirm the sighting. But when he reaches the lookout's post, there is no one there.
The lookout should, of course, be stationed at his post, but for some reason, he's abandoned it. Where did he go? The master-at-arms searches the ships and eventually finds him. It's almost like he's hiding from something. He's a younger sailor, and he's very rattled.
The master-at-arms orders the lookout to return to his post and show him the anomaly in the sky.
The master-at-arms is probably thinking, this kid is just going a little stir-crazy on the ship. And he says, okay, show me. And the kid immediately points out something in the sky. And sure enough, there's a light up there, and it seems to be following the ship.
He gets out a pair of binoculars for a closer look, and it comes into focus. It's clearly an aircraft, and sure enough, he finds himself getting a close-up look at a flying saucer.
The master-at-arms radios the commanding officers and confirms the lookout sighting. The crew is really starting to worry, because even though they can see this craft in the sky, it is not being picked up by their radar, and it appears to be pursuing them.
Word of this UFO spreads through the ship pretty fast, and soon the crew is crowding around, fighting for a look at this thing.
Not only are they getting an amazing clear look at the UFO, they grabbed some cameras and managed to get it all on film.
With the UFO confirmed, the ship's captain reports the sighting to their naval command.
Here's this Navy crew, realizing that they are part of something huge, a shared close encounter with the UFO. backed up by film, photographs, everything. They must be thinking that they're about to go down in history. But it doesn't take long for those hopes to get dashed.
The captain's commanders order him to return to port immediately and forget about this UFO, as though it's no big deal that a flying saucer is right next to their ship.
The ship reaches port by morning, but once docked, no one is allowed ashore.
The crew is prevented from leaving. They're waiting and waiting aboard the ship, and they have no idea what it is they're waiting for.
The experience soon takes an unexpected turn.
The ship is boarded by a group of men in black suits. The sailors don't know who they are or who they represent, but they see their superior officers deferring to these guys, so they follow suit.
The ship is locked down, and the men in black interrogate every sailor on board.
Not only do they grill everyone on board, they also search the ship from top to bottom and confiscate every camera in the place. And the sailors just have to stand there as every piece of evidence is snatched away from them.
What is going on here? I mean, a few guys in dark suits can just board a Navy battleship and start to boss everyone around, and the crew actually listens to them. I mean, who in the world would have the power to do this?
After hours of interrogation, the crew is finally released with a warning to never discuss what they saw or their encounter with the men in black.
These guys aren't FBI or government agents, and yet they have authority over the military. Maybe they report to a shadow government that wants to suppress all evidence of UFO encounters.
Is it possible that the men in black could have such power over our own military, or perhaps they are working together to keep the secret of UFOs hidden forever? While we often look to the skies for evidence of unidentified flying objects, there are many case files that contain sightings of ocean-dwelling UFOs. Where do they come from, and how will our seafaring heroes defend themselves and the public?
Think about how much space there is to hide in the ocean. If there are UFOs underwater, we'd have no way to know how many there are or what they're up to. But there could be something very big going on down there.
October 4th, 1967, Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia.
In the fall of 1967, a man by the name of Laurie Wickens is driving home late one evening with his friends. In the distance, Wickens spots a strange, unusual flashing object.
This object has flashing yellow lights, and it looks like it's falling out of the sky right towards the harbor.
Wickens is so alarmed by the speed and trajectory of the object towards the water that he pulls his truck over.
Wickens fears that he just witnessed a plane crash, so he goes to the nearest payphone and makes an urgent call to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
The senior officer on duty, Corporal Victor Werbicki, listens to Wickens' call and assumes he is drunk. However, soon multiple calls start coming into the police department, all describing a similar crash into the harbor. It turns out most of the town saw this crash.
Carl Feint is a water UFO specialist.
We call it a crash, but we're not sure because it didn't go into the water immediately. It was above water, and sitting there for a while, and then submerged.
It doesn't appear that what people witnessed was any kind of earthly craft, and it's just plunged into the middle of Shag Harbour.
Corporal Werbicki rounds up a team of local fishermen to help investigate.
Werbicki sees this strange yellow light in the water, so he and his team get into boats and head towards it. There aren't any signs of survivors, bodies, or even wreckage. And now, the yellow light and submerged object they had seen from the shore is nowhere to be found.
They are soon joined by the United States Coast Guard.
The Coast Guard arrives on the scene and they resume to search for another few hours. They can't find anything and eventually call off the search around 3 a.m.
But once the police search ends, a secret military investigation begins.
What most people don't know is that on October 5th, 1967, the Canadian Forces Headquarters dispatched the HMCS Granby to investigate. They had specially trained divers and went down to do a thorough investigation.
Decades later, several of the crew members come forward and finally admit that the Granby did in fact track a UFO underwater for an entire week.
From the private interviews done years later, the story emerged that the Granby tracked that underwater UFO over a 25-mile stretch to a place called Government Point.
A military base at Government Point picks up unusual activity from the underwater object.
Suddenly, the UFO starts acting strange. This craft that had been eluding the Navy for a week seems as though it's stopped and given up. It's just sitting there in the water. So more ships are dispatched from Government Point to investigate.
But what they did was surround the disabled UFO. And they brought in Navy divers to go under to check on what was down there.
As the Navy closes in on this craft, their instruments suddenly pick up a second object. There's another UFO in the water, and it's heading right towards them.
The crew is completely stunned. The second UFO positions itself on top of the first one, and it appears as though the second craft is repairing the first UFO.
Somehow they sent out a distress signal to their people.
The crew has no idea what they're dealing with. They're completely out of their element, with not just one unknown object, but now two.
At this time, another witness reported a Russian submarine in nearby Canadian waters. This prompted a few of the U.S. vessels which were tracking the UFO to be pulled off that duty to investigate the Russian sub. And while they were doing that, the two UFOs made their move.
The UFOs race towards the surface, blast out of the water, and vanish into the sky.
One underwater craft is strange enough, but the fact that this UFO apparently called for help and that help arrived immediately, what does that say? How many of these things are down there?
There was another ship in the vicinity that was able to come to the rescue and assist this thing under the water, which shows me an organization here behind the scenes. There's something far more going on than mere exploration.
If the government is keeping UFOs secret from troops on the ground and the sailors in our oceans, then they could be putting countless lives at risk. Summer, 1983, the Caribbean Sea.
It was a hot summer night in 1983, and the USS Yellowstone was sailing north back to its home port, Norfolk, Virginia. The conditions were perfect, not a cloud in the sky.
At about 3 a.m., a sailor on the Yellowstone notices a glowing green spot in the middle of the ocean. The seaman takes his binoculars to get a closer look, but can't make out a shape yet. He can only tell that it's a solid object in the middle of the ocean and that it appears to be directly in their path.
As soon as this guy realizes that this is something very out of the ordinary, he radios the officer on duty to report the object.
He tells the officer, look, we're on a collision course with something. He asks what they should do, but his superior doesn't seem too concerned.
The officer on duty's only reaction was, Roger that, without any change in course.
The ship continues on a collision course with the strange glowing object.
The seaman is confused and concerned, so he repeats his warning with even more urgency. But this time, he doesn't even get a response. He's thinking, why am I the only one who seems to care that we're about to crash into something?
Now, this ship is going full steam ahead towards this unidentified object in the middle of the ocean. The seaman on lookout now has a clear, unobstructed view.
They're getting closer and closer to this thing, about to hit it, but they just miss colliding with the object. Still, the sailor gets a good look as they pass. It's a metallic, spherical craft. Most of it is submerged, and it's easily 40 feet in diameter.
As the ship passes the object, the seaman yells to the crew to get to the starboard side and look at what they almost hit. But the other sailors miss seeing the object. The sailor tries to explain what he saw to the officer on deck, but gets no reaction.
What did they nearly collide with in the middle of the ocean? And why was the ship's officer so intent on hiding its identity?
How is it possible that a sailor standing watch gives warning of a collision and the officer on deck barely acknowledges the alert? Could the officer have been well aware of what was in the water, but didn't want to draw attention to it? Maybe authorities already know what's lurking in our oceans.
This is what they do time and time again. The authorities will deny and ignore because they want the public to bury their heads in the sand when it comes to these encounters.
For the men and women who protect us from everyday dangers, it takes a powerful combination of grit and courage. But in the perilous world of UFOs, with its tangled web of lies and deception, it may require a special kind of bravery to break the pattern of secrecy for the greater good. December 12, 2009. Residents of Barstow, California, report the sudden appearance of a UFO skimming over their rooftops in the pre-dawn sky.
Witnesses claim that this UFO streaked across the neighborhood and then it touched down in a desert across the highway. So what they decided to do was walk over and see what was going on.
But the residents quickly find that the strange craft is not the only unusual arrival that day.
The citizens are making their way towards the lights. They're coming out of their house in the early morning, and then all of a sudden, a fleet of SUVs barrel right past them towards the scene.
Those SUVs were heading towards the UFO. Nobody ever got out and said that, you know, we're from an official agency or government. They didn't acknowledge them.
Witnesses claim the vehicles encircled the grounded UFO, shining their high beams outward and blinding the onlookers. Any details of the downed craft are lost behind a glare of headlights.
Before anybody can get a good look at what's going on, a flatbed truck rolls in. And then about 10 minutes later, all the cars pull out, and what was on this flatbed truck is about the size of a VW Bug, but of course it was covered in a tarp.
The convoy disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving the residents of Barstow with far more questions than answers.
And that's it. The witnesses contact the police and the military, and they hit dead end after dead end. No explanation is given.
Could this be another UFO incident locked away in a classified file? With yet another UFO incident locked away in a classified file, it emphasizes the importance and bravery of one man who comes forward with his incredible story.
My name is Clifford Stone. I served 22 and a half years in the United States Army. On several occasions, I was called upon to be part of an elite unit to assist in the recovery of objects of unknown origin, UFOs. And I know for a fact that those objects did not originate on the face of this planet.
Clifford Stone's case is pretty remarkable. Here's a man who claims to have first-hand experience with UFOs as part of an elite military recovery team. Now think about that. Think about what that means. Everything that we've been talking about is confirmed right here in this man's story.
Stone began his Army career in 1969 and was assigned to the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Unit, known as the NBC.
It was a good cover for me, because these teams would always be utilized. You would go there, you would secure the site, you would recover the object and any bodies or living entities, if any were there.
According to Stone, these sites were located all around the world.
We had teams set up that would actually go out worldwide to recover fallen UFOs. We have gone to South America. We have gone to Europe. We have gone to Asia. You name it, we have gone there to recover objects of unknown origin.
During this time, Stone's services were called on at a moment's notice.
When an event took place and you got the call, you'd grab your BA-50 bag, you'd go ahead, you'd kiss your wife and your kids goodbye. Then you'd go, and you had no idea whether you was ever coming back, because accidents happened. People died because we were dealing with technologies that we didn't even begin to understand.
Stone notes that procedures involving UFO sites followed a very specific set of protocols.
There'd be a total blackout on any news getting out. We would have several different cover stories. We could always cover it up by stating it was an experimental aircraft that crashed. If there was any media involvement, we were prepared to go so far as saying that there was a nuclear device on that craft.
After every mission, there was a rigorous debriefing.
You'd be debriefed and then cautioned not to talk about it and be told it was classified. You had a classified non-disclosure statement. And each and every time you had an event, as part of the debriefing, you would sign that statement.
Stone's experiences seem fairly consistent with many encounters that were covered up.
They had a standard protocol on how you do the recovery. Everybody involved knew exactly what their mission was.
Could Stone's testimony be true? Is it possible that the government has been hiding its involvement with UFOs and their inhabitants for decades?
I think, what would I do? If I were the government, what would I do? I would absolutely have a manual. I would absolutely have protocols in place. Now, maybe this wouldn't be a public thing. Maybe there would just be a few individuals, key individuals, that would know about these protocols. But I would absolutely be prepared that another Roswell wouldn't happen. That absolutely makes sense to me. I would do it, so why wouldn't they do it?
For the heroes on the front lines of UFO sightings and attacks,
These UFOs appear to be on an unrelenting mission. How do you defend against that?
the consequences of government suppression,
The general public is not told everything about what our military is encountering in these war zones.
and concealing key secrets about alien encounters
If they're not a threat, then why are they still a secret?
could mean the difference between saving innocent lives and the possibility of unspeakable death and destruction.